Hello and welcome to Writers and Books Visiting Author Series. My name is Dan Hurd. I'm the Director of Adult Programs. Writers and Books is a nonprofit literary arts center in Rochester, New York. We offer readings, workshops, and literary programming for people of all ages, all currently available online. Our theme for 2021 is Taking Care. We're celebrating different ways we can take care of ourselves and take care of others this year. You can check out our upcoming schedule at wab.org. Please say hello in the chat and let us know you're there. Feel free to submit questions through the Q&A function. Books are available through our bookstore, &Books. I'll put the links in the chat. We're so excited to have Lilly Dancyger with us this evening. First, we'll hear her read, then she'll be in conversation with author Alisson Wood. Alisson Wood's writing has been published in the New York Times, the Paris Review, the Rumpus, Catapult, and No Tokens. Being Lolita is her first book. Lilly Dancyger is the author of Negative Space, a reported and illustrated memoir selected by Carmen Maria Machado as one of the winners of the 2019 Santa Fe Writers Project Literary Awards. She is also the editor of Burn It Down, a critically acclaimed anthology of essays on women's anger. She is a contributing editor at Catapult and an assistant editor at Barrel House Books. Her writing has appeared in Long Reads, The Washington Post, Glamour, Playboy, Rolling Stone, and elsewhere. The writer Melissa Febos has said of Negative Space, "This book is so many things: a daughter's heartrending tribute, a love story riddled by addiction, a mystery whose solution lies at the intersection of art and memory. Together, they form a chorus that I could not turn away from and didn't wish to." Lilly, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, Dan, and thank you, Alisson, for being here to chat. All right, I'm just gonna jump in. I'm gonna read for a little bit, and then Alisson and I are gonna have a conversation. So let's see. I think all you need to know about this section is that the Joe that I'm referring to here is my father. I refer to him sometimes as Joe and sometimes as my father, but they're the same character. And the Kathy here is his first love, who he's just broken up with because she wouldn't stop using heroin. In the summer of 1981, about a year after he left Kathy, Joe hitchhiked through Mexico. He'd been gone about a month when he called Lake Place one night just to say hi. Bud told me they'd been waiting for his call so they could tell him that Kathy had overdosed and died. I thought immediately of the moment I found out my father was dead, how all light and sound collapsed in around me. I wondered how he handled that blow when it came for him. I imagined him, a young man out adventuring, skin tanned and clothes dirty, stubble on his face, smoking hand-rolled cigarettes, light and free and living his life, and then boom. Did he fall to his knees on the street in whatever Mexican town he was in? Did he yell no over and over again like I did? Did he think maybe he had misheard, that maybe he could go back and hear it differently? Nobody was there with him, and Bud couldn't remember who'd actually broken the news, so I'll never know how he responded. But I do know that he got drunk, passed out on the beach, and got robbed of everything he had with him. It was a story I'd heard him tell, but without the context of why he'd gotten so drunk on that particular night. I pictured him sitting in the sand on an empty beach in jeans and a flannel shirt, staring out at the moonlight reflecting on dark waves, wondering what he could have done differently to save her. Taking big swigs straight from a bottle of tequila, and waking up in the morning, baking in the sun, his mouth as dried out as the sand, his pockets looted, the memory of the news he'd gotten the day before as harsh as the morning sun. Hearing his adventure stories as a child, I pictured him as the hero in one of the westerns he loved so much. His John Wayne impression was spot on. But placing this one in the context of his grief over the death of his first love, he no longer sounded like a cowboy, but like a sad, lost boy. After Kathy's death, his work changed. He abandoned the color palette she had introduced, the electric blues and yellows they used when they painted together, the spray paints and bold splashes. Mark remembers that everything turned to gray tones and browns, the palette he would primarily work in for the rest of his life. the dark, natural tones of dried leaves and unfinished wood, of concrete and scrap metal and lead. And this was when he first started making art out of dead things. He'd been working with found objects for a few years, but now he introduced roadkill. He would sneak into the Yale libraries and Xerox dead birds, and then draw over the Xeroxes, creating multi-layered images of women with real bird wings. A black and white photo from the time shows him standing on the side of the road, wearing a plaid shirt and a cowboy hat, triumphantly holding a mangled dead bird from one wingtip. His face is boyish, a "look what I found" expression. The next page is an image of one of those Xerox pieces. Don't know how well you can see it over Zoom, but I once carried a festering bird carcass on a Greyhound bus to make my father happy. When I was 9 or 10, my cat killed a hummingbird. I wrapped it in several paper towels, put it in a Ziploc bag, and carried in my travel bag on the 3-hour bus ride I took from the Central Coast up to San Francisco to see my father on weekends. My mom had packed a peanut butter and banana sandwich for me to eat on the bus, but when I saw the 2 Ziploc bags next to each other, I lost my appetite. It was worth it, though. When we got to his apartment, I immediately took out the bag with the hummingbird in it, careful not to hold it too tightly because I didn't want to feel its little feet through the paper towels and plastic, and handed it to him. He looked surprised and a little skeptical when I told him to open it. As he carefully lifted the paper towels off of the tiny corpse, he let out a breathy, "Wow." He was thrilled with the gift. He made a wire cage for the dead bird, which he hung outside his bedroom window so it could decompose without stinking up the apartment. He would eventually turn its bones and wings into sculpture material. Even after his death, dead things always appear to me as presents for him. While I grew up with his owl pins, I didn't see a real horseshoe crab until I was 13, and my father had been dead for just over a year. I was walking along the beach when I spotted it right there in my tracks, a giant rotting owl pin tangled in seaweed. Marveling at how accurately nature had imitated my father's work, I picked it up with an inside-out plastic bag, careful not to touch the sharp spines that used to scratch my skin. I thought of how happy he'd been when I brought him the hummingbird, his beaming face clear in my mind as I stuffed the mangled, too fleshy owl pin into my bag alongside my water bottle and sunscreen. The stench of rotting sea life was overpowering, especially for a squeamish vegetarian adolescent girl. But I had to collect this real-life Shackman piece and bring it home, ignoring the cognitive dissonance of a gift for a dead man. My father did the same thing after Kathy died, his art a series of gifts for a dead woman. He continued the guerrilla installations they had started together, making sculptures and then abandoning them, letting them deteriorate. He took a trip out to the woods upstate and left sculptures hanging in trees, photographing them before leaving them to the elements. The process of rotting in the woods was the last stage of the development of these pieces. Like paint drying or glue setting, their destruction was their creation. I always thought that these pieces and his interest in how they changed were all about his enjoyment of materials, his curiosity about how they behaved over time. But learning that this work started when he was mourning Kathy, it felt clear that they were also about loss. He was creating sculptures that would die, making his grief tangible. Before I had ever experienced loss, my father taught me to surrender the things I'd made. When he took the bus down from San Francisco to visit me in Carmel, the trip he wrote about in his notebook, we walked to the beach that was just a few blocks from where I was living with my mother. Carmel Beach is breathtakingly gorgeous, the kind of beach that's photographed to advertise California tourism. I loved that beach, but I spent a lot of time there being lonely, resenting my mom and our move to the quiet seaside town, missing my father and feeling like I didn't belong. But with him there, I felt like it was finally okay to really enjoy this magical place that was practically in my backyard. We walked around collecting shells for a while, and then started playing a game at his instigation where we drew pictures in the sand with long sticks as quickly as we could and then watched them be erased by the lapping waves. I drew mostly abstract shapes, maybe a couple of cat faces, but his trained hand managed to create animals in motion, fleeing the tide. We had only a few seconds for each round of drawings before a new wave would rush over it, soaking our legs and erasing our work like a giant Etch-a-Sketch. It was a game that involved a lot of shrieking and running, but underneath the playful surface was a valuable lesson in impermanence. The work he made after Kathy died was about deterioration and letting go, but it was also about holding on. He conjured her over and over again in his artwork by making the things that they had once made together. He continued to draw and sculpt dogs, though they were tortured like he was. He showed them surrounded in darkness or starved near to death, with their ribs showing, or eviscerated like the dog carcass piece that showed at civilian warfare. He showed them hanging by the waist from ropes, suspended and helpless. He'd gone from the loyal companion following Kathy to New Haven to the ferocious guard dog fighting to save her from addiction, and finally ended up grizzled, abandoned, near death, the last stage in the evolution of the imagery of his first love. As I thought about how much art he made about Kathy after her death, I couldn't help but draw a parallel. I was doing a similar kind of conjuring here, art as a spell to raise the dead, creating him on the page like he created Kathy in his studio, writing my grief into these pages to make it tangible so it would exist somewhere outside of me and I wouldn't have to drag its weight with me always. I'm going to read just the beginning of the next chapter. I'm just going to take a sip of water first. As I pieced together the story of Joe and Kathy, how my father watched heroin destroy his first love, powerless to help her, and how deeply he grieved when she died, I couldn't shake the quiet but insistent voice in the back of my mind demanding to know how he could have let the same thing happen to him. I felt a painful tug as what I learned about Kathy started to shift what I knew about my father. I remembered how I knew he was clean when he died because he'd told me so, and the vindicating autopsy report that confirmed it. No drugs in his system meant drugs hadn't killed him. I remembered how I'd repeated the phrase undetermined causes and been comforted by the lack of a clear answer, because that meant it wasn't the one answer I couldn't bear. And I wondered, did it really? The first time I talked to my father about heroin, I was 8. When I stayed with him on weekends after my parents split up, he slept on the carpeted floor of the room he was renting, and I slept on the bed. He would watch with pursed lips while I carefully brushed the plaster and sawdust, metal, and pencil shavings from the dingy sheet before lying down, occasionally commenting that I'd inherited a fear of dirt from my mother, as if it was a weakness of character from which he was lucky not to suffer. Across from the bed, under the room's one window, was my purple desk that we had found on the street. There were small chips in the paint, so I went to the drugstore and found a nail polish just the right color to patch it up. I would sit at this desk and work diligently while we played a game he invented called Studio, where we both pretended to be artists sharing a studio space, each working on our own projects. While we worked, we would listen to either Bach or Miles Davis, or on the few occasions that I wore him down, no doubt. Studio was a way to keep me occupied so he could work, but it also created some of my best memories of him, an approximation of what it might have been like to spend time with him as an adult, in comfortable silence, both of us working. He worked on his sculptures, and I attempted to make myself a pet robotic dog, with a wire skeleton and a paper towel digestive roll tract. I also made my first ever carving, a princess, out of a bar of soap, which my father suggested as a good practice material. He showed me how to use a chisel, like this, he said, miming a smooth downward gesture away from his body, an angle that would make it nearly impossible for me to stab myself if I replicated it properly. He trusted me to be careful with potentially hazardous tools. Though when he taught me how to use a table saw, he joked that maybe we both needed adult supervision. On the third wall, next to the door, was a stack of milk crates he used as a bookshelf. One day, I pulled out one of his big hardcover art books that I loved to pore over, looking for paintings of beautiful women to inspire my princess drawings. Probably Rembrandt, Renoir, or Sargent, my favorites. As I flipped through the book, I found a piece of tinfoil tucked between the pages. It was folded into a square, with several small circles burned into it. I often pretended to know less than I really did about grown-up things going on around me, partly so that adults would continue to be candid and I could learn more, and partly to avoid the awkwardness of them crouching down to have a serious conversation with me. But I had a vague understanding that my parents were addicts. I idolized super smart girls in books like Matilda and Harriet the Spy. I was the kind of 8-year-old who could figure out what a methadone clinic was for. I knew that addiction was a problem my parents were dealing with, but I didn't differentiate it from the other grown-up problems they worried about, like paying rent or keeping the house clean. I knew enough to understand that drugs were bad for you, but in the same abstract way, I knew that broccoli was good for you. Playing innocent, I held up the piece of tinfoil and asked in my sweetest voice, "Papa, what's this?" He didn't answer right away. He looked hurt, like when I told him I didn't want to try out a new drawing technique. It was a look I worked hard to avoid, and one that could get me to change my mind in an instant, to draw or paint or read whatever he wanted me to. The look I later imagined might have been the only thing that could have convinced me not to drop out of high school. After some deliberation, he answered honestly, "That's from doing drugs." And then dishonestly, "But it's from a long time ago. You must have just gotten lost in that book." He wanted to tell me the truth, but also didn't know how to admit his weakest, lowest parts to the little curly-headed girl who stared up at him like he glowed. Then I guess the guilt got to him, and after another long pause, he told me that actually it was recent, but that he had stopped again and he was doing better. I believed him and appreciated him not talking to me like I was a kid. He came over and kissed the top of my head, surrounding me in the smell of tobacco and plaster, and then we went back to playing studio. After that, there was a shift. Now he understood that I was watching, that I knew what was going on. Over the next couple of years, I would ask him about it even when there was no tinfoil to arouse my suspicion. He started telling me honestly how his efforts to get clean were going. He didn't use the word heroin or even the words drugs or addiction, but I would ask how he was doing and he would know what I meant. "Really well," he would say, "I'm healthy." Or sometimes he would say he was dealing with some stuff, or that he was not doing so great but going to get better again soon. When he eventually went to inpatient rehab, he apologized to me over the phone and said the doctors were helping him there, making it so he could stay healthy when he left. And then there were those last phone calls, where he assured me he was healthy and we made plans to camp under the redwoods. We had our code, and it worked. And I never doubted, even when the adults did, that he'd been healthy when he died. As a teenager, I was angry at everything but him. My father was the beloved lost, blameless as a saint, while I blasted my anger like buckshot at my mother, at teachers, at truant officers and cops and store owners. Even when my teenage rage slowed to a simmer in early adulthood, I thought of my father's death as something that had happened to him. Cruel and random. But then I learned about Kathy and started to doubt the murky, once comforting half-truth about his death that I'd clung to for so long. Slowly, over time, creeping up on me, sneaking in through trapdoors, a realization started to form. As I walked to the store, I started to question what I knew for sure about my father's death. In yoga class, I thought about how vindicated I'd been by the autopsy report, how angry at Audrey and everyone who'd assumed it was an overdose. Sitting on my couch drinking coffee, I thought about the last 10 years of my life when I somehow believed that my father's mysterious death had nothing to do with his drug use, and how I now knew he'd started using by the mid-'80s at the latest, likely the late 70s, off and on until just a few months before he died in 2000. And I felt like a fucking idiot. A 43-year-old man's organs don't just shut down for no reason, and the damage done by poisoning yourself for 2 decades isn't instantly reversed the moment you stop. Then, like an electric shock, I wondered if it was even really true that he was clean when he died. I'd held that win so tightly and for so long that it had turned into a hard, resentful little stone in the core of me. Was it even real? My mother could have lied to me about the report. I'd never read it myself. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. I get the report, I read it. Turns out he actually was negative for heroin when he died. And then at the end of that section, I say I felt relief, but also a twinge of doubt, a needling question of whether it really made a difference, whether the drugs killed him all at once or little by little. The outcome was the same. I wished I could go back to when undetermined causes had been enough, but undetermined cause doesn't mean no cause. And once I'd made space for the knowledge that it had to be drugs, I couldn't go back. I started for the first time to see my father's death not as something that happened to him, but something that he let happen, a suicide of neglect, like a lie of omission. It took a little while to sink in, but when it did, I was flooded with anger. Anger like water so hot it feels cold. Anger that I had never before let myself feel toward my father. My understanding of him, of the world I lived in, and the course of my life had always been that he would be here with me if he had a choice. But now I felt like he hadn't tried hard enough to stay. Like he could have saved me from all this grief if he really wanted to. If he'd gotten clean sooner and stayed clean. And then I was crying hot rage tears, screaming into my pillow, realizing how furious I was at him for leaving me, realizing that I'd been furious at him for half of my life and I never even knew it. I was shocked at myself for feeling such anger at an addict, as if addiction were a simple issue of willpower. It went against everything I consciously believe about addiction. I believe in decriminalization and treatment and needle exchanges and decreasing stigma. As a teenager, at a time when I barely cared about anything, I volunteered for an organization committed to legalizing ibogaine, a controversial treatment for chemical dependency. I had wandered haplessly into the foothills of addiction myself and not even noticed it happening. I knew my father's addiction was not a choice, but the anger was there, and no amount of logic could touch it. It came from the part of me that doesn't speak in words or understand rational thought. And after so long of not even knowing it was there, I couldn't ignore it once I discovered it, like not knowing you have cancer until your lungs are overgrown and twisted. In discovering my father and Kathy's story, and learning about this grief that so deeply marked his life, I was finally able to see my own grief more fully, allowing it to be complicated by anger. Like it's easier to give advice to a friend than it is to know what to do in your own life, easier to recognize when a friend is being mistreated than it is to stand up for yourself. I could only see my loss clearly by looking at my father's. I could see that Kathy had left him, that she wasn't just taken from him by some external force. I could see that he would have felt abandoned, betrayed, and angry underneath his grief. And I finally saw that I felt all of those things too. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lily. Oh my goodness, that was so beautiful. Thank you so much. It was so nice to hear that nice sort of more full section.
Yeah, I wanted to read that anger section a couple times, but it doesn't really work without the preceding chapter. So it's glad to have a chance to read for a little longer tonight.
Context is so important.
Yes.
So the first question I wanted to ask you about was, so we are both memoirists, right? We both write about ourselves and our lives. And something that I think is so important and you do so well in the book is you create this wonderful Lily as the speaker, as the voice, as the narrator, who obviously is not you, Lily. Like I know we both believe that to write a memoir, to write an essay, the I is an act of creation. But something that I think that you do so well is that you also create grief on the page. You capture it and you render it so strongly and so powerfully. And there's such this expectation that when we're writing about something traumatic or something sad or something difficult, that it's cathartic, that, you know, it's this sort of rewarding experience in the end. And that wasn't my experience writing my book, but what was it like for you?
Yeah, I think that's a story that people tell themselves about memoir, because without that, it's hard to understand why the hell anybody would ever do this.
It's a very fair question. I ask myself all the time.
I ask myself too, you know, and I wish that it were as simple as like, you know, I wrote this book and now I have processed my childhood trauma and my grief. Sorry, my cat is sleeping a psycho right now. Just running across the screen. I think it does, you know, it brings stuff to the surface, which then maybe gives you an opportunity to work through it in a way that you might not have otherwise if you hadn't gone digging, and it would have just stayed under there and festered. But I don't think it actually sorts everything out for you, you know? I think it stirs everything up. So all of the gunk that had settled to the bottom is now on top, and then you're left to kind of figure out what the hell you're going to do with that. But then also you're like promoting a book and you have to go and smile and be personable and charming and, you know, yeah, all of that.
My trauma is fine. Buy my book about it.
Exactly. So it's
Here's my book to buy about it. Buy my book about trauma.
Exactly. I think it's another splitting, like you say, you know, like there's you, the author, and there's you, the narrator, and there's you, the character, and there already are like 3 different versions of you.
And then there's also you, the person, somewhere
Right,
in there.
that too, don't
Just
forget
that one.
Right. And so like you, the narrator, may have like processed. You have to process to a certain extent. You know, this is not to say that it doesn't move that process along at all. It does, otherwise you wouldn't be able to write the story. But it processes it just enough for you, the narrator, to make a neat narrative in the book. But then you, the person, is still left with therapy to go to.
Yes, so much therapy, so much therapy.
Yeah.
I think that's so interesting. I completely agree with what you just said about that. And hello, Kitty. Hello.
Lady, she wants to participate.
Hi, lady. My cats were very much a part of my book tour.
Yeah.
So yeah, I completely agree. And I also think that as a writer, unless you have already done enough processing to be able to create the work, you know, I mean, I always feel a little bit hoity-toity when I talk about it this way, but like I'm trying, and I know you are too. When we write, we try to create art, you know,
Right.
we're trying to create something beautiful and powerful and communicative. And in order to do that work, you can't be like in it.
Right.
Because then you have no space, and you can't step back and see it and make decisions and editing and think about a reader and all those things that you are doing so clearly in the book.
Yeah, whenever people talk about memoir as therapy or catharsis or whatever, you know, I always think like maybe the first draft, you know, maybe you know, there is a part of the process that is like just excavating and dumping all that stuff, you know, but like that section that I just read about anger, you know, that was like 20 scrawled notebook pages originally that would not have been interesting to read, you know, and that part was cathartic because that was me really like realizing that I had all this anger, which, you know, had been brought up by the process of working on the book and trying to figure it out on the page. But then to turn it into something that is like interesting to read, that took another several years of like craft more than therapy.
Right. Right. I think it's exactly that. That sort of that work of excavation that people think is cathartic, but I actually found it to be horrible and to be, you know, for my book, I had to read all of my high school journals. I know that you were doing a lot of digging into personal effects and things as well. I found that incredibly painful and not healing. Like I found that work to be very difficult. So then for me, when I was writing, it was both, I was working on the craft part, and then for myself, I was working in therapy on like, okay, how do I deal with this now in a way that I can then make good choices for the book and be able to talk about my trauma almost daily during book tour, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. We got to the same place at the same time. We understand. So one of the biggest and like most beautiful things about your book is the use of art, the use of your father's art. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about your choice to include it. Because I mean, and that was a choice, you know, you could have not. I mean, traditionally in a memoir, there's not like an art component, there's no illustrations. But then again, I think of a book like Citizen by Claudia Rankine, which is so much made bigger and richer and, you know, more accessible in some ways with the images. So I just wanted to know what you thought about the use of your father's art and making that decision, and was that a deal breaker for you? Did you want to do that from the get-go?
Yeah. The art was really the impetus for the project. You know, it started out, it was originally going to be an art book, you know, like one of those big hardcover coffee table books. That was what I originally thought I was writing. And then it kind of turned into a memoir over the process, you know, over a decade of revision and feedback and whatever. But I kept that, you know, I feel like the monograph, the art book that I originally wrote is still in there. It's the very core of the book. It's the central thread that everything else then like coalesces around. And I did have people suggest that if I took out the art, it would be easier to sell, because hybrid work scares publishers. A lot of them just don't know what to do with it. And of course, printing images is expensive. There are all these practical reasons to take it out, but it just was never an option to me. It felt like, if you take out the core of it, the whole thing would collapse in, and then they would have nothing to do with what I set out to write anymore, and then it's just a memoir about my dead dad, which is not what I was trying to write, even though that obviously is part of the story, but it's a book about art at its core. So yeah, that had to be in there. And that was definitely a deal breaker for me. Yeah.
Right. I just want to say that even if the art was not in it, Negative Space is not just a book about a dead dad.
I know.
I know.
But yeah, it just, it felt to me like the whole thing would have come crumbling down without
right.
that.
The other option could have been just like a lot of art description,
right.
I mean, there are other ways to do it, but you made this choice, and I think it was the right choice.
Yeah. And also, it also was the way that allowed it to feel kind of like a collaboration or a conversation. Having the art in there was the closest I could get to letting my father speak for himself. I interviewed everybody around him, and the art is the part of the story where he gets to speak. So, it felt essential on that level as well.
Right. And I think that's something really wonderful, and that really comes through in your book, is that conversation, that collaboration. So often when we're writing books about the past, about someone we've lost, someone who no longer exists anymore, even if that's ourselves, a version of us, there you can sort of feel that space, that negative space,
yeah,
perhaps.
Yeah.
And I think that using the art and incorporating your father's art really helped bridge that in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
So talking about art, I know that as part of one of the launch events, you had a mini art show in New York City for your father's work. Can you talk a little bit about that? I was in Maine, so I couldn't come, but it looked amazing.
Yeah, for all the years of work, and difficulty and rejection and frustration and all that painful excavation and all of that, but part of what kept me going, I just always imagined this big art show that I was going to have at the end, and it was celebratory of completing the project, but also of my father's work, and like bringing it, the original impetus of the whole project was to share his work with the world, and I always considered the show to be kind of part of the project. It wasn't separate from the book. It was the last stage of the book. And so when I launched during a pandemic, I was really disappointed and, felt really dejected that I wasn't able to do launch. Yeah, there was a lot of emotion about that. It felt kind of anticlimactic in a lot of ways. But then I just decided, what, fuck it, I'm going to do the show anyway, even if it's not the launch. And so I ended up doing it like 2 months after, which actually I turned out to be for the best, I think, because it turns out that putting on a gallery show is a lot of work. It was a lot.
I've heard that rumor.
Yeah.
I've heard that.
Yeah. And so I'm actually glad that I wasn't doing all of that like the week before my launch, which was already like very fraught and stressful and emotional and, a lot of logistics and a lot of, feelings. So I'm glad I'm glad that I got to like do that. And then, the art show was kind of after the main flurry of the launch, and I could just focus on that. And it was really, really wonderful to, after the show, I just went in and like stood in the gallery by myself and just like looked around and saw it all on the walls, and it felt really, really good. And also just getting to celebrate, a bunch of my friends came, and a bunch of like friends of my dad's came, and they were all like, emotional and happy to see it. So yeah, I'm glad I was able to do that, even though it looked like for a minute there it wasn't going to happen.
Right. It feels like that a lot of times. And I mean, I think also it's been especially difficult to have launched a book, during COVID, you know?
Yeah, I mean, you're supposed to get some like, I think that's the catharsis, right? It's not writing the book, it's the afterwards. It's
Celebration.
done. Yeah, like I want to stand around and drink like little plastic cups of wine and have everybody tell me that I did it.
Yes.
Have some like, just you want people to be there and like say, see, I really was working on something all those years when I said I couldn't come out because I was working. I wasn't just blowing you off.
Right.
So not having that was weird. I know you dealt with that too.
Yeah.
But yeah, now that things are opening up again, I'm hopeful that all of us that launched in the pandemic get to kind of make up for it a little bit and get a second chance.
Big parties, big book parties everywhere. Yeah. Did you feel like the art show was a little bit of that for you?
Definitely. Yeah, it definitely kind of drove it home and made it feel real. And, and having like friends from so many eras of my life and people who've known me the whole time I was working on it and, family there, getting to like, see, I did it. Felt good.
Yeah. Well, I just wanted to say that we're wrapping up. So if anybody has a question, please feel free to put it in the chat. But I have another question for you, Lily, even in case no one jumps in. So when we're writing, obviously there's the art that's on the page that we've written. There's the incorporation of your father's art in your book. But also I think something that's so important from a visual perspective is the cover.
Yes.
The cover. So the beautiful cover of your book.
Yeah.
And I remember, because you and I are friends, IRL, I remember when you were going through the cover journey.
Everything had to be a saga. Yes.
Where we write memoir. Of course,
Yeah.
everything's a saga. I mean, that's what we do. But I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about your cover journey and how you got to your cover and just what that was like for you, especially because, this is very much a book about art and this is a book in conversation with art and your father's art. So I'm sure that it felt especially important for it to be right.
Yeah, there were really high stakes for that. And obviously, using my dad's art as a cover image was something that I talked to the publisher about before signing the contract, just being like, this is something that I need to happen. And, one great thing about being at a small press is you have a little more flexibility, you have a little more say. So Andrew at SFWP was like, yeah, of course, sure. So it's like, okay, good. Then the question of which piece to pick. And originally, because there's no color in the inside images, I thought that the cover was going to be a good place to highlight one of the color pieces that didn't translate well to black and white, so it had been cut. And so we went back and forth. It was this whole thing, and we had this cover with this really graphic red dog painting. And it was like, it was okay, but there was always something that was like not quite right about it. But I'm not a graphic designer, so I couldn't quite put my finger on like what was not right with it. And then Kate Anderson, my editor who I was working with, texted me when we were like pretty close to doing the cover reveal, and she's like, okay, be honest, do you really love your cover? And I was like, I mean, no, it's okay. She's like, I hate it. Can I design a new one? And so this cover was actually Kate's idea, and she was like, it needs to have negative space in it. And she like looked through the folder of images and she's like, how about this one? It's like, oh my God, yeah, you're so right. That looks way better. And she like mocked it up in like 10 minutes while we were on the phone with each other. It's like, well, you're an angel and it's beautiful and I love it. So if you ever see this, Kate, thank you. Love you.
Thank you, Kate.
Yeah.
Kate, thank you. No, I mean, covers are so important. They're so important because, when you're looking at a bunch of books on a table in a bookstore, in a magazine, you see the cover before you see anything.
Yeah. And that whole don't judge a book by its cover thing. I mean, like,
That's bullshit. Everybody judges books by their
cover. Yeah, obviously you do. And yeah, you know, and I didn't want to use the rabbit because this image in particular is very tied in with my parents' relationship, right. And I didn't want that to be like the central thing. But then I was like, I'm reading too much into it. People look at the cover, they aren't going to know that. It's fine. It just looks good.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I mean, I know that for my book, I had a similar journey in that there actually weren't that many options that I saw. But so my book is it's Being Lolita. It's about my experience with an English teacher in my high school and how he gave me Lolita. And it was an abusive relationship. Shocking that it's an abusive relationship. Yes. And so I only saw one other version that was very beautiful, had flowers on it, you know, big pink flowers. I know it's going to be a flower book, which I had explicitly said I didn't want. I sent my publisher a 32-page PowerPoint of images that I hated, like examples of other covers that I hated, covers that I loved, like inspo things. Like it was basically just sort of like, you know, Pinterest boards for my cover. But apparently there were ones that involved a blackboard. Huh. There was one that involved a lily pad on a pond, and there are no ponds or lily pads in my book anywhere. Yeah. And then I suggested this.
I love the sunglasses. Yeah.
I suggested this because I was like, you know, the sunglasses are iconic. They're broken, but you still look at it and you're like, oh, got it. You know, and I think it actually sort of like, you know, it tells a story.
Yes.
Right. But then, of course, I had the moment of overthinking it where I was like, well, do I really want like the Kubrick Lolita image? Blah, blah, blah. But then I was like, no, this is perfect. And then I even had sunglasses that I gave out as like swag. So yeah, how come you didn't send everybody, you know, like little lucky rabbit bunny keychains?
I know, I thought about it. I was like, but then I decided that like art postcards or like prints of the images was going to be the best swag.
I don't know. I still think it's not too late. You could send out 100 lucky rabbits.
100 rabbits.
100 rabbits' feet. I mean, come on, just to like your best friends.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, does anybody have? There's one more question somebody wants to throw in there? If not, the last thing I want to ask you about is. So something that I think you do so powerfully in the book is that so much of the book is about place, right? It's about grief. It's about your dad. It's about your mom, you know, it's about people. It's about you, obviously. But I think there's also just such a strong sense of place. I mean, even in the part that you just read, there's the dirty sheets, there's the milk crates, right? There's the purple desk, the tobacco, the plaster. I mean, it's such a beautiful, tactile, like corporeal world. And I just wanted to, you know, hear what you thought about when you were doing that, craft choices, editing.
Yeah, I wanted it to be a really New York book. You know, that was important. I wanted it to be an East Village book specifically, and to bring that neighborhood to life and to write about it. You know, that has been such a big part of so many stages of my life, you know, my early childhood and my teen years, and then my like young adulthood and early years of being married. You know, we're all within like a few blocks of each other. So, you know, I have a lot of connection to that place. But it also was hard to write about a place that's so well known and so documented, and like there is so much written about East Village. There are TV shows and movies and like music videos, and like, you know, there's so much just media about that place already. So it took time, you know, the first couple times that I was, stop it, sorry, my cat is yelling at me. I'm talking with my hands. She's like, what are you doing? The first couple times that I was describing it, I was like, no, you're just describing like a Madonna music video. I was trying to describe like, you know, late 80s, early 90s East Village. So I was like, no, you're like falling back.
That's not wrong for the record. That's not wrong.
But I was trying to, you know, I was like digging through those layers of all this other media that I consumed about it to try to get to my memory of it, like my version of it. And that took time, and it was hard not to fall back on like cliche. But yeah, that was something I worked hard on. It was important to me for it to be, you know, a record of the place and time as well as like the people in it. So I'm glad that came through.
I think you did an excellent job about that. I mean, I feel like it was so powerful. Thank you so much for taking this time with us tonight, Lily. And if you haven't already, please buy Negative Space. Please buy Negative Space from the independent bookstore, Ampersand Books. All of the links are right there for you to just click on and purchase. And thank you again. Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Lily. Woohoo.
Thank you so much. That was wonderful. Yeah, buy their books, the links in the chat. I want to thank our funders here. I have a slide. Thank you to our funders. Thank you to Lily and Allison. Thank you. I want to thank everyone for coming. This video or this reading and other readings will be on our website on YouTube, so you can check that out or see it again. And I want to thank everyone for coming and have a great night.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Mwah.
Mwah.